Zealand to see how fans are handling that overnight, may I say, painful, nearly heartbreaking draw. Our NBC News reporters are following all of the latest developments. Let's start at the D.C. courthouse with NBC's Ryan Riley. What's the latest there, Ryan?
We're very closely watching to see what activity we can sort of suss out this afternoon. One interesting component of this is that the indictment would have to be returned in open court, though not necessarily by name. So they could simply say, the courtroom deputy could read out loud, the indictment has been returned, U.S. versus DT in this situation, or DJT. So that's sort of what we're looking out for here, and basically going around checking all of those doors to see what's happening. The chief judge can have this, or it can be the on-duty federal magistrate judge. The on-duty federal magistrate judge is usually the person who receives it. Right now, she is in ongoing initial appearances for just other defendants who are working their way through the system here. So we're keeping an eye on that courtroom to see whether she ends up going somewhere else, or what exactly happens when those initial appearances usually wrap up, which happens usually sometime within the next hour. We could see in the 3 o'clock hour some potential returns. I think that's when we're really going to be focused on this to see what exactly is happening at the courthouse, and if there is indeed going to be a really historic investigation launched and an historic indictment returned against the former president of the United States.
Ryan Riley at the courthouse, thank you so much. Right now, police are searching for a 17-year-old suspect in connection with the stabbing death of a gay man who was dancing at a Brooklyn gas station. NBC's Antonia Hilton is here for us. Antonia, what happened, and what more can you tell us about the manhunt?
Well, Chris, this manhunt is underway for the 17-year-old, but we're also learning more about what actually happened late on Saturday night. O'Shea Sibley was out with friends at this gas station in Brooklyn, dancing, it sounds like goofing off and celebrating to Beyonce's latest album, when suddenly a group of men approached them, hurling anti-LGBTQ slurs and demanding that they stop dancing. And according to friends, that's when Sibley stepped forward and he tried to stand up for himself and his friends and tell them that being gay was not bad. That's when the fight ensued, and he ended up being stabbed, according to authorities who suspect the 17-year-old of committing this crime that has sent these shockwaves through the community here in New York. I've been speaking to people all day who have been grieving the loss of O'Shea, who was a popular dancer, both in the underground voguing dance scene, popular with LGBTQ Americans, but also in the professional dance scene through programs in Alvin Ailey and in his hometown of Philly. And so as people grieve, they're also pointing to these sort of larger national concerns right now, Chris. In particular, GLAAD and the Anti-Defamation League have been pointing out that since June of 2022, there have been more than 350 recorded incidents of harassment and assaults against LGBTQ people. Another organization has tracked an average of about 39 anti-LGBTQ protests happening across the country every month right now. That's up from a previous average of just 3 of those kinds of protests each month. And so they are pointing to a climate, an environment here. And for a while now, LGBTQ advocacy groups have been warning that this kind of rhetoric, that the conversation, the politicization of LGBTQ people would translate to violence in real life. And now they're looking at the death of O'Shea as an example of their greatest fears right now. And so we expect that there are going to be vigils for him later this weekend. And people are waiting minute by minute for more updates from the authorities as they search for the suspect.
What a horrific and senseless loss. Antonia Hilton, thank you. Appreciate it. Now to that escalating battle between President Biden and Alabama's senior senator, and what it all has to do with Space Command. NBC's Mike Memoli is live from Delaware. So what's happening?
Well, Chris, as the White House announced this decision yesterday that they were going to keep Space Command where it's been in Colorado Springs, Colorado, you would expect the kind of swift and severe condemnation from Alabama Republicans like Senator Tuberville, who called this a blatantly political decision. Of course, the White House sparring already with Tuberville over the issue of military promotions that he's holding up over abortion policy. But I also thought it was interesting to see criticism coming from a fellow Democrat, Congresswoman Terry Sewell, who said that this was a decision that was putting politics politics over merit. She said she expected more from the Biden administration. That's the kind of criticism from within the family that we've heard, I think, in the past as well. And so what the White House is saying, now we remember, of course, the White House ordered a review of the Trump administration's decision to move Space Command to Alabama last fall. And as they were making this decision public, what we're hearing from the Pentagon, as well as this morning from John Kirby, a spokesperson from the National Security Council, was that there was only one factor driving the administration's decision here, and that it was operational readiness. The decision being that if they were to have to uproot Space Command from Colorado, move it over the course of, this isn't an overnight operation, the next few years, potentially up to a decade, to Alabama, that could disrupt readiness of this force at a time when space has emerged as a real emerging battlefield with China. That this is being really the explicit explanation from the White House, that there are concerns that China would have a competitive advantage while the United States is moving its operations here. Now, we should also note that there was some concern, some reporting, in fact, that abortion policy played a factor here, that there was concern that moving this Space Command to Alabama would hurt recruitment efforts because of Alabama's new restrictive abortion policy. The White House also saying that that was not a factor in this final decision, Chris.
Mike Memoli, thank you for that. Now to that close call for the U.S. women's soccer team at the World Cup. NBC's Molly Hunter is in New Zealand, and she has the highlights from that nail-biter. Hey, Molly.
This late-night party shouldn't fool you. U.S. fans are not happy with this 0-0 result. A tie is good enough, though, to move the U.S. on to the knockout round. Not exactly, though, the game that they wanted. Take a look.
That's going to do it. Wow is all we can say.
U.S. hopes Rose Lavelle leading the offensive charge again.
Curling ball low, headed over.
And again, but the U.S. not finding the net. The 28-year-old midfielder starting for the first time this tournament after recovering from an injury earlier this spring, getting handed her second yellow card in as many matches, which means she's out for the next one.
Disappointed in myself to pick up that yellow and not be able to help the team next game.
The U.S. has started the exact same 11 players these last two games, and tonight, veterans were setting the pace.
Going out there, I know I'm confident in my game, but I feel like my teammates are able to look at me and know that I'm going to bring something and know I'm going to, give everything.
And in another game this morning, the Netherlands landing a 7-0 final score and securing their top seed of the group. The U.S. team looking disappointed in that post-game huddle. But the diehard U.S. fans are determined.
The amount of stress I had every single time they were right in front of the goal, and I was like, yes, 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 yes.
Now, next up for the U.S. team is going to be facing off against Sweden in Melbourne. They do have 5 days, though, before that game. And when we spoke with Megan Rapinoe after that game, she says this team needs to really analyze, look at all that footage, and really take these 5 days to focus in on how they show up as a stronger team going forward. I'll send it back to you.
Molly Hunter, thank you. Still ahead, the city of Atlanta bracing for a possible Trump indictment in the Georgia election probe. What the DA has to say about conducting her investigation at the same time as special counsel Jack Smith.
I cannot imagine what it's like to be overseas, in Afghanistan, in Iran, in any of these places where people live in peril to help us, ensure a free and fair world and keep our democracy upright. To see the former president of the United States treat these classified secrets with such impunity and such arrogance and such unthinkable cavalier behavior I don't think we should lose sight of that. Those are people's lives.
It's a split-screen waiting game for Jack Smith to move on possible federal charges in D.C., where the grand jury is now in session, and Fulton County for D.A. Fani Willis's decision on an indictment against Donald Trump and others in Georgia. Barriers are already up around the courthouse in Atlanta, just one sign of heightened security there. Of course, no one knows exactly when that decision will drop or whether it will collide with special counsel Jack Smith's election interference case. But take a listen to the D.A.
I don't know what Jack Smith is doing, and Jack Smith doesn't know what I'm doing. In all honesty, if Jack Smith was standing next to me, I'm not sure I would know who he was. My guess is he probably can't pronounce my name correctly.
I want to bring in NBC's Blaine Alexander in Atlanta. Charlie Sykes is editor-at-large of The Bulwark, as well as an MSNBC contributor and columnist. Lisa Rubin is an MSNBC legal analyst. I guess maybe there's a difference, Lisa, between coordinating and communicating. What do you think is going on between Jack Smith and Fani Willis?
Chris, I agree with you. There's a difference between coordinating and communicating. But in this case, I actually don't think either one is happening. I really do think that Fani Willis and the Department of Justice are pursuing their investigations on separate tracks. Once either one of them or both indicts, do I think there will be some sort of communication? Probably. I do think that there will be communications between and among the various prosecutors here to try and determine a schedule. And in particular, Alvin Bragg, who's the Manhattan DA, last week said to a New York public radio show host that just because he was the first to charge doesn't necessarily mean he'll stand on ceremony and insist that his case be first to be tried. That's the order in which it is now. It sounds to me like he'd welcome a call from the Department of Justice, or at least be open to it. My sense is that Fani Willis would do the same after her grand jury or grand juries indict in her investigation.
Okay, we are just getting a report from the D.C. Let me go to I want to make sure I have it, to my text messages. So the grand jury now has been seen leaving, so they are done for the day. What does that tell us?
It either tells us that they're going home because they expect to see another witness at another time. But I think, Chris, in light of everything that we're hearing, that's increasingly unlikely. I think they're going home because they're done. Chances are that they have voted on a true bill of indictment, and we should be looking to see whether the foreperson of the grand jury is entering a magistrate judge or a district judge's courtroom right now to hand up that indictment and begin the process of its filing.
Assuming, Charlie, that's what's going on here, what are you looking for in this indictment?
Well, what I'm looking for is whether or not there's new evidence, new material, whether or not Jack Smith makes it a speaking indictment, whether he tells the story as he did down with the Mar-a-Lago investigation. I think that it's, it would be naive to think that this is going to move Donald Trump's poll numbers. We've seen what's happened in the past. But at this point, the venue is now shifting from politics into the courtroom, and this is the big one. This is the indictment that we have been waiting for since January 6th, and I think probably it will overshadow everything that has come before.
I want to step back for a minute, Charlie, and remind people what Donald Trump said about a candidate who faces charges. He was referencing Hillary Clinton back in November of 2016. Take a listen.
If she were to win this election, it would create an unprecedented constitutional crisis. In that situation, we could very well have a sitting president under felony indictment and ultimately a criminal trial.
Should we anticipate that there will be, let's say, a different take if that happens here? We've already had an indictment happen, but what's your take on what we just heard, Charlie?
Well, that was then, and this is now. The juxtaposition of what Donald Trump said about classified documents in 2016, what he is saying now is rather telling. As well as that, look, all of these positions are very situational, and we've seen people turn on a dime. We've seen Republicans change their standards immediately when it comes to Donald Trump. So, don't be surprised if you have a quote that is say exactly the opposite. But the fact is that Trump had a point back in 2016. We absolutely uncharted waters now. The possibility of a presidential candidate being indicted, maybe even being a convicted felon, somebody taking the oath of office while out on bail.